England to read law and specialized in international space law, satellites and planes and stuff like that. And there I met a retired pastor called John Stott, who encouraged me to go into full-time ministry, but I told him, I'm not a heroic type going to the forests and jungles and slash away and build schools and all that. I'm city guy. I read London Times. I'm not really that kind of tough material. And he says, we're looking for the intellectually tough people in the church today. And he identified two major challenges for the church. This was in the 1980s. The first challenge is modern science. And he said, the nature of theological training is we do not touch the sciences at all in theological training. So we don't know how to cope with the advances in modern sciences. The second challenge is the number of religions, not just today, but been around for a long, long time, ancient religions, and many of them seem to overlap in the teachings. How do you cope with it? Even though he was an Englishman, because he traveled widely, especially in Asia, he was quite aware if your family, or much of family, came from traditions that are different from the Western liberal Christian traditions, the stakes are very high. It's not just an easy statement. So he felt he wasn't one, because he was born in England and he just didn't understand the cultural problems, but because I was there in England, he thought that might be something I want to do. And a few years later, I took him out and I became a missionary here in New York in 1990, focusing on international students, and especially looking at different subjects they're studying and how that could relate to the idea of God and theology. And when I went on to study seminary at Princeton and Yale, I ended up doing a PhD in theology and science, looking at two areas in the physical sciences: human origins, what we call paleoanthropology, all the fossils and bones and stuff, and the other area is cognitive neuroscience, how the brain actually works in the nature of belief, structures, memory, consciousness, and emotion. So these are the areas that I focus on professionally. Nonetheless, today I'm here to talk about something that has a stronger focus on history. We're looking at how Silk Road Christianity came about. And you might ask the question, what has this to do with science and theology? Well, actually quite a lot, and here's the reason why. In the long history of Christianity, 2,000 years, we have evolved the way we understand God. We have evolved in the way we understand the Bible. And in almost every case that our thinking changed, it's in response to human knowledge. It's in response to what we learn about the sciences, the technologies that allow us to discover things, and the medical advances that change who we are as people. So let me give you some examples of this. We're going to spend some time on Marco Polo today. And when he came back to Italy in the 13th century, and he was almost like under house arrest, he began to talk about his travels. And the book that came out, written by another ghostwriter poet, is called Travels of Marco Polo. This was before the printing press, which means we don't have two identical copies of Marco Polo's travels. We don't have two identical copies, by definition. There were 13 known editions, so dramatically different that scholars are concerned, how does it work? Now, what happened when the printing press came along, or rather the movable printing press in 1455? We now can have the same type of books, but if there are errors, we have identical errors in all the books. Right? You can't change errors. By the 20th century, people began to question whether he actually went to China. And they said he must be a fraud, because if he went to China, he would have mentioned the Great Wall of China, but he never did. But then we didn't know the Great Wall of China today is not the Great Wall of China in Marco Polo's time. He was there during the Yuan dynasty that ended in 1368. The modern Great Wall of China is a Ming invention. It came about after Marco Polo had died. So knowing history, knowing archaeology, knowing the technologies help us to understand why things are different, and we have a better way of determining whether something is true or not true. A second reason they mentioned that Marco Polo may have lied was because he mentioned elephants. And there are no elephants in China as far as we know. But he mentioned elephants that came from India. And now we know, just through years and years of historical research, that when travelers travel across the Silk Road, it was common for them to exchange stories, and your story becomes my story, and now it's legitimate for me to say that I saw elephants because effectively I saw someone who saw elephants, right? And by the way, we kind of do it today too, with our kids, with our friends. I watch a TV program on Natural Geographic on zebras. I've seen a zebra. I challenge you to tell me I've never seen a zebra before. It is so real. With 3D TV, oh my God. With holographic TV when it comes, can't imagine, right? So what does it mean to see something? What does it mean to know something? These are all changes of ideas as we understand. In the 1830s, with the invention of another remarkable invention, today we call it the camera, it changed everything. Because for the first time, you can see and show a snapshot of what you saw to another person across time and space. For the first time, you can give proof of what you saw. So can you imagine if Marco Polo had a camera in those days? The stunning things that we will see and what he saw is quite amazing. In any case, I'm just giving you examples of how science, technology, and later on even medicine can change the way we think about a lot of things. In medicine, I think the easiest one would be the discovery of mental illness as a disease of the brain. And that came about very, very late, sometime in the 20th century. Before that, anyone who had a mental problem just across the world would have been regarded as either sinful, wicked, or punished by God. And the remedy is normally to punish the victim. It was sometime in the 20th century when people began to see the association between the physical brain and the function of the brain called the mind. So that changed, and Christianity also responded to it. And recently, by the 1950s, when we discovered that actual chemical changes in the brain changes your moods, changes your thoughts, theologians begin to wake up and say, do they also change our beliefs? And if they do, what does it mean? This morning's New York Times article, a neuroscientist working at the National Institute for Mental Health had a brain tumor. This happened just recently. And she was really surprised. She spent 30 years studying schizophrenia. And when the brain tumor happened to her, she knew this brain tumor, but it didn't bother her because her emotions and the sense of well-being was transformed by that very tumor. And eventually, when it went away, she wrote about it and became a very major article. And it's here in the New York Times. I think this morning's edition can read about it. In any case, as we look at all these changes, we began to ask the question. And in our ministry, the Academy for Christian Thought, we do three things. We do the primary research. We do the education part, which this is part of, teaching lay people about technical stuff as much as we can. And then we publish. We publish books and publish monographs to identify what are the issues that are really important for the church today. And here's the reason why. For the most part, people have come to understand the nature of God from what they learn about God through the Bible, through church, through Sunday school, and even seminary. The one area that is neglected for a long time is the area of the natural sciences. It's very interesting, we all use it. We use the technology to fly in aeroplanes and go everywhere. We have iPhones, projectors, and we don't quite know how to connect the two. Well, something happened in the 1990s. Princeton Seminary made a decision that they want to invest in the world's first professorship of science and theology. So here's the problem. There was no known PhD in science and theology in 1992, but they found a South African who was both a theologian and who studied the philosophy of science and became the first professor in the world in the field. Today I think there are 5 in the world, but still not many. In any case, that's how I got into it, and my interest in answering questions that international students from other countries ask me led me to these issues. How do we know what we know? Why do we believe as we do? Has not just our beliefs evolved over the years, but has Christianity evolved over the years? And if it has, why did it evolve? So let me give you 1 or 2 examples of the evolution of Christian thought, which actually impacted on Third World Christianity. The idea that, for example, there can only be one denomination that's right and the others are wrong. Now, that idea of exclusivity was so dominant in the first 400 years of Christianity that every time there's a disagreement, someone had to die. And it's very tragic. It's terrible, but that's what happened. people die. It was like that all the way to the 17th century, up to the wars in Europe. Someone had to die. And typically, the justification was this: better to die, your body die, and save your soul. Except it's always never there, someone else's body has to die. And the idea of human rights, when it came about in the UN in the 1950s, really called to question these sort of issues. These ideas of the fights that we have among religions and within religions, are these really from God, or do they reflect the human violence that we have within us? The idea that we must be right. Now today, we can't answer this question because it's a very, very difficult moral question, but we can see what happened in the emergence of what we now call the Nestorian Church. So let's start with the summary here. I'm going to mention 4 points. And by the way, don't worry about taking notes, because every slide will be made available on slideshare.com, and the entire recording today in video will also be uploaded in our ACT YouTube channel. You can download every one of them, right? Now, we've heard about the Roman Catholic Church. We've heard about the Protestant churches. Then we've Church of England, because the Church of England is neither Protestant nor Catholic. It's a separate category all its own. Okay? But few of us have heard about the Nestorian Church. And that's because it started very, very early. It started splitting in the 5th century. So think of it this way: in the past 2,000 years, every 500 years, more or less, there's a major division of the Christian church. So in 431, the big split was the one I'm going to discuss in just a few seconds, the Nestorian split, where the Bishop Nestorius had a disagreement with the other bishops over who Mary was. Among the other so-called Orthodox Christians, they felt Mary was the bearer of God because Jesus is God, is divine. Bishop Nestorius felt God is God, no person can carry God. So he wanted to say, you can carry the Christ, but you can't carry God. You can call it Christotokos, so we get the name Christopher. But the other says it has to be Theotokos. You must carry God. And you can see the conflict there. Now, on both sides, as it turned out, the issue wasn't just who Mary was. The issue was, how do we identify the nature of Jesus' person? If he's divine, can a divine person be carried by a human person? And you can see the analogies become realities, and there are all these conflicts. So that was the first big split. The second split came about in 1054, about 500 years later, and that split was the split between the Orthodox churches speaking Greek and the Western churches speaking Latin. This was partly a linguistic problem. Different languages have different interpretations of the same words, and they can be very radical. The third split came about in the 16th century, and you all know about Martin Luther, John Calvin, and all these people in Zurich as well. So every 500 years or so, there's a major split in Christianity. And I know what you're thinking right now. We're in the 21st century. Where's the split? Is it coming? And will it be a traditional split, or will it be a split of disintegration into very, very tiny bits where every community will have their own pope, so to speak? Right? Because today there's no control, in a sense. You can't have one pope saying, if you don't do this, you can't do that. Because today, for the most part, whether we like it or not, economics play a very major role in the nature of religion. If you have the resources, you can ignore everyone else. If you can't do it. Now in the past, we didn't have the technologies to actually have a virtual church. Today it's possible. So these are things to think about. But let's go back to this. The Persian church became the Church of the East in 424 and adopted Nestorianism. Now this is a very interesting idea of adopted. It's not that the church in Persia agreed with Nestorius, but they sided towards his idea that surely even someone as powerful as Mary cannot be understood to be carrying God, because that would diminish the nature of God's divinity. In any case, along the Old Silk Road, this Nestorian Christianity encountered Roman and Byzantine Christianities as it launched its mission to the East. So here is the story of these people. The Persian church, the Persian Empire was so big, It covered modern Iran, modern Iraq, parts of Turkey, parts of Armenia, and parts of what we now call Syria, the eastern part of Syria. And there were already two kinds of Christianities very dominant there, the Roman Christianity and the Byzantine Christianity. This was in the 5th century on. But the Byzantine Christianity was very new. In any case, a third Christianity came about, Nestorian Christianity. And number two, by 635, this Christianity called the Nestorian Christianity of the Persian Church that came to be known as the Church of the East, so it's very confusing. So let's call it Church of the East. They sent a missionary, we do not know his name, but we know that the Chinese gave him a name called Alopen, and Alopen was sent to China, arrived in Chang'an in 635 AD, and Christianity began to spread all the way to the steppes of what we now call Mongolia and Siberia. And the reason I say what we now call Mongolia, because Mongolia was invented by Genghis Khan in the 13th century. It didn't exist before. There were Mongol peoples, there were Turkic peoples, there were Karyats, all kinds of little groups. But as a unified nation, like every nation on earth, they are all inventions of culture. There's no such thing as the Mongolian people until the name came about, and then everyone woke up and decided, I'm Mongolian. Okay, now number three, Genghis Khan created Mongolia in 1207 and terrorized Europe as well. Now, when we say Mongolia terrorized Europe, it wasn't that there was this unified country going about to say, I'm going to claim Europe. There were still disparate tribes going about, and within Mongolia itself, there was a lot of tension of who is going to be the leader, who is the main leader, like in every kind of culture. His descendants mastered Asia as China's Yuan dynasty, and then later on, another descendant, Batu Khan, and his golden horde of devil's horsemen nearly obliterated Roman Christendom in 1241. They went all the way to Bulgaria and was about to enter Western Europe. And because of communications, again technology, right? They had to get back to Mongolia, right to where almost Siberia, because the great Khan had died, they had to vote for a new one. They can't do it by proxy, they can't send fax, they got to go all the way back, and it takes about a year to do this on horseback. So that was what saved Western Europe. The Pope was so terrified because the Pope realized we can't defeat these guys. So later on we'll see that's how the first Franciscan missionaries went to China, hoping to have trade relations with the new Mongol people and say, we have a common enemy. That common enemy is Islam. Well, number four, Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, wanted the 7 liberal arts of Europe and requested 100 missionaries from the Pope. What he did was he heard about these, the learning arts, the trivium and the quadrivium of the Roman people that was inherited by Western Europe, and he realized that if we can train our minds, we can even overcome the limitations of the body. The Mongols were very good with the bodies. They can shoot on horseback, arrows and all that. But he realized the discipline of the mind was very, very important, and he wanted the 7 liberal arts. Marco Polo reported on widespread Nestorian Christianity at Kambaluk, which is modern Beijing, and all over Cathay, the old name for China, in the 1280s. So that's what we're going to do today. Okay, we're going to go from the 7th century to the 13th century, and largely on what we now call mainland China. So let's start with Jesus. Around AD 29, a Palestinian rabbi taught his disciples 3 things: to be compassionate to the weak, to preach the good news, and to understand that his kingdom is not of this world. So these are the 3 major, almost new things that came out of this one person called Jesus of Nazareth. Within 400 years of his execution, Jesus' followers had spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. Some of them went east of Jerusalem to Syria, and that's where our story is. They came to be known as the Church of the East and preached the gospel to the ends of the earth. And this is their story. Their concern was preaching to the ends of the earth. Now, you may or may not know that the idea of the ends of the earth depends on how far you can get, basically. So, for example, in Paul's time, in the book of Romans, when he says your fame is on the ends of the earth, he's talking about Roman Empire. Not that he doesn't know there are human beings beyond it, but it's irrelevant to him, because if you can't get there, it doesn't matter how far it is and how many people there are. So the idea of the ends of the earth was a very fluid concept, depending on when you say that term and where you say it from. For as far as the Chinese is concerned, the end of the earth is really outside the walls of Beijing. That's where all the barbarians began to come in, and they will tolerate them. But even then, if you go further west, you'll hit the Tian Shan Mountains, just west of Xinjiang. And they are so high, up to 27,000 feet. And for the Chinese, beyond that, that's where the real barbarians come from. There's no point going there because there's no real civilization. The Indians have a similar concept. The Indians never call themselves India, it's a British term. They call themselves Bharata. And that's why the term Mahabharata, Great Bharata. As far as the Indians are concerned, this diamond-shaped subcontinent is where civilization is. Anything outside of it is a diminished, morally poverty-stricken humanity. Okay, so let's look at the Church of the East in 424. The Persian Church of Assyria. There's so many names, but we see Assyria, Syria, they're all about the Church of the East. The headquarters move, if you look at the map in your mind, from Damascus in Syria to Baghdad in what we now call Iraq, and then further east, all the way to Persia, what we now call Iran. So these are all today Muslim countries, but in those days, these were all Christian civilizations. They became independent of Byzantium and called itself the Church of the East. We'll call it COTE from now on, with a Syriac liturgy. And today, if you go to India, Western India in Kerala, and it's very interesting, it's called the Church of St. Thomas, because the tradition was Thomas went there. Their liturgy is not in the Indian language. It's not Latin and it's not Greek. It's Syriac, because that's where they came from. And that's where they considered their mother church in Damascus. The COTE increasingly adopted Nestorianism and distanced itself from the Fourth Council's Chalcedon Formula of 451. There are 4 councils that all the churches agreed on in the early days. And after the Fourth Council, there was a split, so we no longer have what is called an ecumenical council. There are many, many councils, but the councils were when Christianity began to ask itself, who are we and what do we actually believe? Now, what came out of the 4 councils, you might ask? I'll just mention 3 things that came out. They are very, very important. The first one is that Jesus is divine. The second one is the Holy Spirit is divine, and now we have a Trinity. And the third one is the importance of Mary. Now, although Mary was never made divine, the importance of Mary was eventually what split up the church in 431. Identification of who this person was, and what's the importance of a mother for someone called the Son of God. You can see all the relationships and all the terms coming into play. In 498, the Bishop of Seleucia Ctesiphon, this is very near modern Baghdad. It's a very ancient town, the capital of Christianity, assumed the title Patriarch of the East. Patriarch is like a pope. So this was the first time there was a competing pope, so dominant that in fact he ruled over more Christians than the Pope in Rome. The Church of the East was the church of the Sassanid Empire of Persia. Here are the dates, about 400 years. From the 9th to the 14th centuries, it was the world's largest church in geography, stretching from the Mediterranean Sea to India and China. And it almost went to Japan. And here's a map here. Sorry, it's quite a weak map, but here we go. Christian missions along the Silk Road. Now, over here you can see Constantinople. This is where Bishop Nestorius was. And when he was deposed, he had to escape for his life. Went to Edessa. Edessa is one of many names given to this town. Today, archaeologists know it as Ur, the Ur of Abraham, where Abraham was born and he lived. And Abraham would have, this is Turkey over here, and this Cairo over here. And, well, Edessa should be somewhere here further, but don't worry about it. And eventually went on to Cairo, or near Cairo. Cairo didn't exist at the time, and then to Baghdad. Now from here, when they were attacked by the Muslims, they went south all the way to Sana'a, which is the capital of modern Yemen. So Yemen became a Christian kingdom very, very early on as well. And from there, using the dhows, following the trade winds, they went all the way to India. Over here, in the Gulf of Aqaba, and went on to southern Persia. This is called the Maritime Silk Road. It's a competitor to the terrestrial Silk Road, which is this one over here, or one of the many Silk Roads. So here, they went to the Malabar coast, and to Kankagor, this is Kerala, and went over here to this island, and today we call it Sri Lanka. And from here, they went on to Malacca, Sumatra, and all the way towards past Hainan Island. Now on this side, on the land route, their Christianity spread this way. There's this huge desert here, they can't go through, And so they went south to Tibet and all the way here, and you will find, oh, they don't have it here, Karakoram is here, and over here is Siberia. And that became, Karakoram became the capital of the Mongol Empire, but Christianity went all the way to Dadu, which is modern Beijing. So this is the map of the Christian mission along the old Silk Road. Now, the Nestorians were not the only Christians who went there, but they were most dominant and they went very, very early. When did the Catholic Church send missionaries there? Only in the 13th century, so almost 700 years later, and really for political reasons, to make nice with the Khan by saying we have a common enemy, and the common enemy is Islam. So let's not beat each other up, let's go for Islam. Now, I'm going to look at here this red bit in the slides. We're going to go through one or two, three, I think four. Let's go one by one quickly. Persia and India, Central Asia, China and Siberia, Tibet, Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, Korea and Japan. These were the outreaches of a single church in that period. Very dominant, quite incredible when you think about the great distances involved. So let's go back to the first one. Okay, to Persia and India. In 489, there's a theological school in Edessa. I mentioned Edessa is the old name for, is a new name for, well, newish name for Ur of Abraham. Today, the Turkish government call it Şanlı Urfa. That's why it's very hard to find it. The identification of where Abraham was today was only identified in 1970s. It's that new. In fact, I hazard a guess that every Bible you have right now has the wrong Ur. It has the Ur of Iraq down towards Basra, right? Every Bible you have today is wrong. The new one, when it came out, was so controversial, not because it's wrong, but people ask questions. How are we supposed to change a Bible, for goodness sake? Problem is, today Bibles have maps. And in the minds of a lot of people, if the map is in the cover of a Bible, we can't change the Bible, or we get cursed by Book of Revelation, right? Can't change the jot or tittle. Do you see that? Now, then you say technology again. Until the 4th century, no one used books. Books were not invented yet. They used scrolls. You can have a scroll here and a scroll there, and you dump it, which means the progression of your book, called the Bible, has no real fixed progression. You can put Matthew here, there, everywhere, it doesn't matter. But the moment they invented a book and had leaves and stitched together into a cover, that progression chronology is fixed. Matthew is always the first book of the New Testament, right? Revelation is always the last book, can't change it. When we added maps, now the question was, is the map also inspired by the Holy Spirit and therefore you can't touch it? You can see the problem, right? In any case, Nisibis was a place to study, often called the world's first university, 350 AD. The church actively launched missions to the Persian Empire in India, competing with Roman Byzantium for the soul of Christianity. And in 644, the Persian Empire fell to the Muslims and became the Caliphate of Rashidun. Next slide, please. How about Central Asia, China, and Siberia? And by the way, can anyone name me the 5 countries of Central Asia? Anyone? Good. Uzbekistan. And?
Azerbaijan.
No, that's South Caucasus. Tajikistan, great. How do you know so much about the Central Asia?
I worked in the UN.
Ah, there we go. Very interesting. Okay, so I just came back, well, I didn't just come back, a few months ago. I spent about more than 3 weeks in Central Asia, tracing not just Christianity, but also Islam and Buddhism in these crazy lands. As you know, all 5 countries are artificial countries. Stalin decided to deliberately break it up and deliberately break the peoples into different countries so they don't revolt against the USSR. And that's why till today, it's a very sad and tragic story, but they're pretty screwed in so many ways. In any case, Central Asia was the first launching pad outside of Persia going east of Persia. And then came China and Siberia. They converted large numbers of Uyghurs into Christianity, and their religion was Manichaeism. Another kind of religion that we're only now trying to figure out what in the world it is. It has elements of Christianity, elements of Greek mythology, elements of Roman mythology, all kinds of elements moved around, and that was their kind of Christianity. From Central Asia, the Church of the East sent missions into China and Siberia, converting many dwellers in nomadic tribes. And that's really important, converting the nomadic tribes. Nomadic tribes are very interesting because when I was in Central Asia, I used to ask a lot of questions. I said, I was in Kazakhstan, And I said, I see a few modern church mosques. Where are the really, really old mosques? And it says, we are nomads. We don't build mosques. We pray where we are. You don't bring a whole building with bricks all around you. We go where the water is, the grass is, and we don't care. So I said, so where do you pray? Well, tents. That's where we pray. So the idea of a single place couldn't work in nomadic societies. And what happened? Islam accommodated. And you'll see later on, Christianity did the same thing. You can't have a cross and a white picket fence church in Kazakhstan. The winters can be brutal, the summers can be hot, but it's a rugged, wild, beautiful country. In any case, by the 10th century, Nestorianism in China declined, but survived in the steppes of Siberia among the Naimans, the Karyats, and the Onguts. The Karyats are our interest because these are the group of people that eventually gave rise to the stepfather of Genghis Khan himself. The Onguts, again, highly disputed. We don't know a lot about them. We know there was a king called George of the Onguts. That's all we know. Among the Karyats, we know of a legendary person called Prester John. As you know, presbyter comes from the word presbytery, and it simply means brother or elder. And in the West, there were a lot of legends about a guy called Prester John, the Christian king of the East. And the Pope wanted Prester John to help them fight Islam. But they didn't know that the Prester John was actually an adulteration of the word Wang. That's an old Chinese name. It became John because they can't pronounce Wang, and eventually became Brother John, and eventually became Prester John. And there are many other groups as well, about 25 or 26 groups. How far did the Church of the East go in missions? Actually, we'll never know, because there were so many of them. And over the years, we lost the documentation. But every so often, you'll find some Nestorian bishop in some weird place in the borders of Siberia or in the steppes of Russia and Mongolia. And you say, where did you come from? And they can't trace their history as well. But as early as the 6th century, the traveler and writer Cosmos Indicopleustes encountered East Syrian Christians in the remote island of Socotra off the coast of Yemen. 6th century. That is a long time ago, and they found Christians south of Yemen. In the 8th century, the Patriarch Timothy I, sometimes they know it as Timothy the Cat, don't ask me the reason why. Timothy I of Baghdad sent missionaries to Tibet, but Christianity arrived there sometime in the 6th century, so even he was 200 years too late. And that was 800 years before the Dalai Lama's Buddhism emerged. Now, a lot of you know the connection between the Dalai Lama and Mongolia, because the word Dalai Lama is not a Tibetan name, it's a Mongolian term, meaning wisdom of ocean, ocean of wisdom. It's given to this because there were connections to the Mongolian peoples, the Yellow Hats. East Syrian Christians reached Sri Lanka, Java, Sumatra, Japan, Korea, Burma, Malaya at the time, today it's called Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand. Now you can see how huge it is. This is the size of the Church of the East. Now, how big was the Church of the West? Pretty much from here on in Western Europe, and that's really it. So, in terms of archaeological research, if I had my druthers, where would I want to go to find out where Christianity went further on? Right smack here. Saudi Arabia has a lot of hidden jewels about Christian witness that we just do not know about, because you may or may not know this, Saudi Arabia does not issue tourist visas. You can only go there if you convince them that they have academic reasons or trade reasons, but not as a tourist. So we'll see how it works. In any case, went all the way here, and even this is a bit dated because they went as far down here as well, and all the way to Sri Lanka. Now, who were the Nestorians? So let's talk about this group called the Nestorians. Number one, the unfortunate thing is it's a misnomer. They have nothing to do with Nestorius the person, but people began to call them that, and eventually they became known as Nestorians. Their real name is the East Syrian Church, and even though most of them had never heard of Nestorius himself, because Nestorius was declared a heretic in 431, the Syrian Christians were rejected by Rome for their association with the teachings of Nestorius. So what happened then is, when the split happened after the temple fell in 70 AD, language played a very important role. In the West, Latin became more dominant. In the East, Greek became more dominant. But Paul's missionary journeys didn't come from the East or the West. It came out of Antioch, the Turkish area. And there, at the time, Antioch was more connected to Syria than to any other culture. In fact, if you ever have a chance to visit Syria when the war ends and all that, you'll find that Syria has the most number of ancient monuments of any country in the world. Rome and Greece cannot beat it. There's over 3,000 monuments. And in 2010, I think, I did a traverse across Syria from one end to the other end. And didn't know it, but I came back with about 4,000 photographs, and 3 months later the war started. So it's gone forever, a lot of stuff that I went to visit. But nonetheless, at the time, Syria surprised even me, and I thought I knew my history, my Christian history that far back, because I went to the city of Damascus, and I saw so many churches, and I said, I don't get it, you're a Muslim country, why are there so many churches? And you said, you don't understand, even the most devout Muslim is so proud of our association with St. Paul. And then you can see, when I went there, they had just built this great, huge statue of Paul on a horse, laying up high because of the account in the book of Acts chapter 8. In the 7th century, Islamic Arab forces overwhelmed Persia, and this led the Nestorian Syrian church to extend their mission further south to Arabia and India, and then further east to Central Asia, Mongolia, Tibet, and China. So that's the reason why they went further east, because they were disenfranchised. They felt this is no longer home. I thought I was home in Syria. The Catholic Church hit at me. So I went to Persia, and a few hundred years later, now the Arabs are coming, so they go eastward. Part of missions initiatives were not entirely because I wanted to spread the gospel to another group. It's partly to find a safe place where I can practice my religion. So as an adult studying church history, you'll be surprised by the mixed moralities involved. It's not always a very pretty sight, but something we need to be aware of in this world today when we hear a lot of black and white stories about who's the good guys and who are the bad guys. Nestorian Christianity thrived in China from the 7th to the 10th century before they declined and survived among the peoples of the steppes. So these were the Nestorians. I'm going to pause for just like 5 seconds. Any questions on the Nestorians from anybody at all? Because it's so important to our discussion today. Okay, hearing that, let's move on. Now we come to Elopen, this incredible guy, you know nothing about him except his name. In 635, the Patriarch Yashua II of the Church of the East, based in Baghdad, sent Bishop Elopen to China. The Emperor Taizong is the second emperor of the Tang dynasty, welcomed him and the Persian Bible. I mentioned Persian Bible because we do not know what it consists of. It's different from the Bibles we have today, okay, because it evolves so differently. In any case, for those who are China experts, you might ask the question, why did the Tang dynasty emperor welcome a foreign religion? The Tang dynasty is known for one thing, a love of scholarship. Even if the emperors themselves were not literate, they knew that in these writings were magical powers somehow. They can transform the minds of people. They can control great populations. They marvel that something like the Bible can actually unify huge numbers of people in Europe, even though the kings can't stand each other. And that was magic. Something in this text was magical. But there was also another reason. Buddhism had gone to China earlier on, and there was a question about this. There are now different religions all over the world. Shamanism came from Mongolia. Which one is the correct religion? Or can we draw from all the religions, all the good bits, and have a super religion? In Nestorian Christianity flourished in East Asia for several hundred years. Churches were built in every province in the country, and copies of the Christian scriptures were copied for distribution. So at the time, the Persian Bible and the Christian scriptures were considered one and the same until the Catholics arrived with their Bible. And then there was chaos. What sort of Bible do you have? Why did you refer to the same Jesus but seemingly different texts? In 781, a stone stela, now known as the Nestorian Monument, was constructed to celebrate Elopen's arrival. Today, if you go to the city of Chiang, and you see the terracotta army, it's very nice. Well, there's another museum at the back, and you'll see, it's called the Museum of the Forest of Stelas. There are about 300 or 400 stone stelas. Among them is this particular one, a stone stela. If you want to see what it says in Chinese and Syriac and other languages, I think there are 3 languages, you can see an actual stone rubbing, life-size one at Princeton seminary in Princeton, New Jersey. In the library, they have a full replica. In the 8th and 9th centuries, Patriarch Timothy I, while his metropolitan, ruled over Christians in all 10 provinces of China. So here's an interesting thing. You can mention that in the 8th and 9th centuries, Chinese Christians were ruled by Iraqis. Very interesting, because that's where the headquarters was. Nothing to do with Rome, nothing to do with Constantinople, and you can see why for over 1,000 years, Christians in the West had no knowledge of these Christians, because the technology of transmission and communication wasn't yet invented. The steam engine wasn't invented till 1800, so you could at least sail. When you're sailing a ship, you only go by trade routes, so you just cannot sail where you want to go. Limitations to all of this stuff. Here's the Nestorian tablet, the only physical evidence we have of 7th century China Christianity. And right here somewhere is a little cross, the Nestorian cross. The emperor in 845 banned all religions other than Confucianism, and Nestorianism began to fade in China. It did not develop strong Chinese roots, and by the 13th century, when the Mongolian Yuan dynasty ruled China, this is the dynasty of Kublai Khan, the church was revived, but when the dynasty fell, again Nestorianism fell. And every time Nestorianism fell from China, it would retreat to what we call Mongolian Siberia. By the way, it might be a well-traveled crowd here. Have any of you done the Trans-Siberian Railroad? I'm about to feel very impressed. Well, if you haven't, and you think about it, the train will stop in Lake Baikal, the world's largest freshwater lake. I think it's one-fifth of all freshwater in the world comes from this single lake, which has more water than all the 5 Great Lakes put together in the US and Canada. This lake, yeah, it's about a mile deep. If you're a diver, you cannot imagine what a mile deep means, because every 30 feet is 1 atmosphere. You go 100 feet, your body feels pretty cramped. 1 mile, yeah, it's pretty deep. In any case, Lake Baikal was ground zero for Christianity around that area, because that's where earlier Christianity would retreat from the steppes of Russia towards this area for safety. And also when China had their wars. Remember I mentioned China is only one central part, and then you've got the Liao dynasty, the Jurchen dynasty, all the other dynasties around, as well as the Song dynasty in the south. It only became unified in the 13th century. And here is a beautiful wall painting of Palm Sunday, 7th century wall. Can you imagine that? This is a long time ago. And you can see their Palm Sunday looks nothing like an English Palm Sunday. It's entirely Chinese, absolutely Chinese, still wearing silk at the time. Okay, let's move on. Now, what about the steppes? We're now going to the 11th century. Nestorian Christianity spread by traders to many parts of the steppes. And here's the important thing. They were not spread by missionaries. They were not spread by pastors. They were not spread by evangelists. They were spread by traders. Every trader, even from Greek times, before Paul was around, you better have a God. Because if you don't have a God, people dare not trade with you. You know the reason why? How can I trust your word? I can trust your word only if I know that you fear a God. Doesn't matter which God. It's nice if you fear my God, but if you fear a God, we're good to go too. But if you're an atheist and you don't fear any God, I can trust you, because there are no sanctions. Until the police system came along, no one could arrest you for telling a lie. Over the next few centuries, various nomadic tribes as well as settled peoples in this region turned to Christianity. Now you might ask questions that a lot of sociologists ask. Why did they turn to Christianity when they already had their own religions? And there are a lot of reasons. Some of them could be, well, you could have a theological reason like the Holy Spirit convicted them. You could have a sociological reason like it was convenient because if people come with guns and, no guns at the time, with swords, you better turn to the sword because otherwise you will be cut down by the sword. There could be other reasons like economic reasons. You want to trade because trade is always preferable to trying to grow crops, which is kind of tricky. Things go wrong, rain and stuff like that. They include the 9 months, the carriers of onwards, and even the Black Chinese of the Western Liao dynasty. When they eventually united as Mongolia, Christianity was already well known as a religion among its warriors. So understand this, when Genghis Khan rose to power and he got all these tribes together and then invented this concept called the Mongol people, they already had tons of Christians around, just not the right kind of Christians as far as the church in Rome was concerned. It wasn't Roman, it wasn't Byzantine, it was their own Nestorian Christianity. the Christian witness then went on to Merv and Baghdad. I mentioned Merv only because it's so unknown and so little known, and I was just there, I think in October. The Christian witness in the steppes came from Central Asia, and central to the expansion is the support of Merv, once the greatest city on earth in the 12th century. I bet most of you haven't even heard of this town called Merv. It's near another town called Mary. So when I first heard about Mary, I assumed it was Virgin Mary. Well, it wasn't Mary, it's Marie. There we go. So they call it Mary on the map, but next to it is this old ancient civilization called Merv, once a great city. In 1009, the Bishop of Merv, which is modern Turkmenistan, informed the Patriarch of Baghdad, which is Iraq, that an entire tribe of Kariak Turks in the steppes in Russia had become Christian and petitioned to support them. So what happened was this. Christians in Russia caught the attention of the bishop in Turkmenistan, who asked the patriarch in Iraq if we could help them by supervising them. Among the Kariaks would subsequently be the mother of Kublai Khan, first emperor of China's Yuan dynasty and great Khan of the Mongols. And the nomadic tribes of modern Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan also turned to the man on the cross. You were wondering about this new religion that came from the West, about the man on the cross. Now, when I mention new religion, you must understand, to us, Christianity is 2,000 years old. For them, it was really young because they had a lot of other really, really old religions. Hinduism coming from the Dravidian areas in India. Zoroastrianism going back as possibly 1000 BC coming from Persia, what we call modern Iran. And there were so many other new religions that competed, but Christianity was the one who made it there. So they were curious about this new religion coming in. And here is the Silk Road city of Merv. And look at this map here. Okay, October 9th, 2015. So this is Sultan Kala, Gala Kala, Kala. This tiny bit is this bit here. So this is not a small town, it's only part of it. And there were so many civilizations in the whole area that we call it Merv, but Merv is not one town. It's a region where all these towns came up. And among these, this is one of the most famous monuments they have, so I went there to look at it. In any case, there's almost nothing there now that survived. It's desert territory, it's very, very harsh land. But that's where Islam eventually used that as the second most important city, as far as they're concerned, after Mecca, believe it or not. So Islam and Christianity competed in this town for dominance. By the 11th century, the Sultanate of Rum came up. And Rum refers to Rome, by the way. What happened was, in Persia, the Islam was the Abbasid empires. There are many different kinds of Islams in the history of Islam, not a single one. And later, a Turk named Seljuk rose to power, defeated the Abbasids in Baghdad, took control, and now they became the Seljuk Empire, or the Seljuk Turks. And in 1064, the Seljuk Turks attacked Armenia. In 1071, they defeated the Byzantine Empire to form the Sultanate of Rome, and the Arabic word for Rome. Now, why do I mention Armenia? Because Armenia is important to the Christian history. It's the world's first Christian country. The second Christian country is Georgia, and the third, Roman Empire. Okay, let's move on. Armenian Christianity in the 12th century. We won't spend much time on this because it's really complicated. I just want to show you that it exists. And the importance of Mount Ararat for the national identity of Armenian people in the church. Move on. And Edessa, I mentioned before, Ur of Abraham, the county of Edessa. And Edessa was founded by the Crusaders, by the way, the name. So when the Christians went there, they forgot that it's a very old place where Abraham was, and they did not know it was Abraham's town. And the reason was, the first misidentification of Abraham's Ur was in the 1830s by a British museum. And it was only in the 1970s where they found an error, and now we have a new one. So if you have a new map, a new Christian map in the Bible, and they look at Ur in Turkey instead of Iraq, that's a good addition. Okay, let's move on. Oh, sorry, next slide before that. I want to connect Ur in the Old Testament and New Testament connection. Edessa was once called Ur, the hometown of Abraham, before he left for Haran on his migration to Egypt. Now what about New Testament connection? And this is going to be pretty weird, but this is Christian history, right? You can either believe it or not believe it. According to Eusebius, the church historian, Edessa was once ruled by a Christian king called Abgar V, who received a letter from Jesus. He was subsequently converted by word of Jesus, 72 disciples. This is a very short 3-sentence summary. What happened was, and this is the problem for historians, we receive these letters and documentations. And this guy, living a long time after Jesus died, said that Jesus wrote him a letter. We're going to ask a lot of questions like, what language was that? Where did he write it on? Who posted the letter? Where is it now? How do you know it's from Jesus? But in those days, a lot of people said that to get credibility. They will say things like, and we kind of have it today too, right? I heard a voice from God. I feel a strong sense Moses spoke to me. Well, I don't want to go too far, but there we go. Okay, let's move on. So I went to Edessa. Can you tell from these photographs that they know they are in the town of Abraham? Abraham, everywhere. Coffee shop, cafe, whatever. It's all Abraham. Okay, let's move on. Now, Genghis Khan and the creation of Mongolia. His name was Temujin, becomes Genghis Khan, or great or universal, and unified the warring tribes to become Mongolian in 1207. They worshipped Tengri, a shamanistic god in the sky, but Genghis was mentored by a Christian Kariak king called Togrul Wang Khan, the legendary Prester John ? Okay, it's the best guess. He intermarried shamanistic Mongols with Christian Kariaks, starting with himself. So, although he was shamanistic, he was happy to marry Christian brides, one of many, many brides. I think a lot of you know genetically, 1 out of 12 human beings alive today have Mongol blood, or rather Genghis' own blood somewhere. I don't know how true that is, but that's a claim anyway. In any case, what's important about this? What was important was, from the time of Genghis Khan, he realized one thing. He could use religion for political purposes, and he could fuse it. And when they fused their religions, very interestingly, because they're nomadic tribes, there was no central control like Rome saying, you can't do that, because people just do it. One of the shocking things in my 10 years investigation was the variety of Christianities along the Silk Road. So dramatic, some are totally unrecognizable to today's Christianity. So we asked some very interesting questions, those of us who are doing historical research. When someone says there are 3 billion Christians in the world, or 2 billion Christians, what exactly do you mean by Christian? We can't even agree. In America alone, we have 40,000 denominations in the US, right? Let alone all the others. Well, it brings 2 questions to mind. Number one, we kind of should be embarrassed and ashamed that we fight each other so dramatically. And we should be a bit humble when making a lot of broad statements like there are 2 billion Christians in the world, because it's a legitimate question people ask. What exactly do you mean by being a Christian? Because the practices are so dramatic. But I think what it forces us to do is to hunker down and say perhaps 90% of what we call beliefs in Christianity are cultural accretions. And in fact, belief in God is a lot simpler than we make it out to be. It has marginally few requirements, fewer than we impose on it. There was a time where you were not a Christian if your church did not reflect the Church of England, or if your church did not reflect the kind of church found in Jerusalem, or if your liturgy is a different language. It's not really Christianity. So today, with new technologies and finding out and discoveries and travel, we raised a lot of questions for ourselves, a soul-searching moment for the Christian church. Okay. Now, this is Genghis' Mongol Empire in 1207. This is the famous Lake Baikal, where 20% of the world's fresh water is located, a single lake. And look at it, it's Mongol Empire. It's almost smack center. The Tatars are here, the Karyats are here, the Naimans are here, the Kyrgyz are here, all over the place. And just beneath Lake Baikal is the kind of border between Mongolia and Russia. And the Jin dynasty is here, Mongols are there. Oops, sorry.
So where would like Beijing?
Beijing wasn't, yeah, much further. Beijing is unknown territory. It's like, for beer lovers, this is an important place. This is where the best Chinese beer comes from. Does anyone know? Qingdao. Qingdao's beer is the best Chinese beer because it's not even Chinese, it's German. The Germans were there in the 1900s, and they brought their, if you go to Qingdao, you'll see all the half-timber homes and all that because it's German territory until very recently. But they left all their beer-producing machines there, and today it's still the best Chinese beer around. Okay, enough about beer. Genghis Khan in the 13th century. So here we have Karakoram. Remember the lakes here? Karakoram is over here. We call it Beijing, but it was called Dadun, Kamboluk and all that. But the spread was so dramatic. Went to Korea, went all the way here to Kabul, Herat, which is Afghanistan, Merv, mentioned Merv, Bukhara and Samarkand in Uzbekistan, Kashgar in part of China, Hotan in China as well, Urgench in Uzbekistan, all the way to Nishapur, Tabriz, which is Iran, Georgia, Tbilisi is the capital of Georgia, all the way to Kipchaks over here to Kiev. That's Ukraine. That's like seriously Europe. All the way to Bulgaria. Russia is over here, nervous to death. So can you imagine, as far as the Pope's concerned, oh my goodness, and these are the toughest Christian warriors, and they couldn't even slow down the Mongolians. Forget about stopping them. You can't slow them down. And he was desperate. They had to rush back to elect the third great Khan, and that was what saved Europe. Now, Sokratani, the mother of Kublai Khan. Before we do that, let's take a short break, okay? By the way, before we do a break, I want to make sure your questions are not hung on too long. Are there any urgent questions you want to ask for clarification? Yeah.
Why are they called Black Chinese?
Next question.
All right, we're talking about us.
There's a full slide on that.
Yeah. On this route, there were so many different forms of Christianity
Yeah.
that you couldn't tell. But is there some common element, like they say, we all know Jesus Christ or Jesus Christ our Lord
Yes.
and Savior? Is there got to be some?
Yeah, there are 4 points where they kind of all agree on, but unfortunately, as far as the Western Church is concerned, they were not good enough. We need more points. And the Western Church's main goal was you have to recognize the Bishop of Rome as supreme commander, including military commander. They all agreed that there's one God. They all agreed that Jesus was, at a certain level, God's son. Everyone knew it wasn't biological, because they knew it doesn't make sense. Okay? They all knew there was something about a metaphysical force. You might call it the Holy Spirit, they might call it the cool wind in China, whatever. They knew that. They knew that the mother of this Isa, or Jesus, is human, Mary. So dominant was this idea that when the tablet came out, they mentioned the 3-1 God. And it's a mathematical paradox in Chinese. They didn't say the 3 in 1, as the Westerns would say, or the 1 in 3, because they realized that's nonsense. They kept it at 2 numbers that interacted eternally, called the 3-1. So that was very complex when it first came out. Any other questions?
What was the idea of sin then, and that Christ saves us from sin?
Sin is a very common concept, but the question then was, what theory do you have on what exactly saves you? There wasn't even agreement in Europe. In the Crusader period, it was very militaristic. So with onward Christian soldiers, the songs came out. So it was very militant. So the idea of salvation was a military salvation. Before the Crusader period, the salvation was economic salvation. You go back to the Old Testament, it's entirely economic. All the blessings of Abraham are economic. They're not spiritual in the sense that we understand it in the New Testament. Okay? But back to Danny's question, like Chinese, there'll be a slide, and you go to the slideshare, you get hold of it. Basically, it's a dynasty that went on to what we call Central Asia, and through a misnomer, they became known as the Black Chinese, but they're not dark-skinned or anything like that. Okay, let's take a few minutes break. We have some books that we look at. I'll be standing there to take any questions about administrative books and the kind of work I do. But in terms of the expedition research, every year I do 1 or 2 where I go to a place. Normally I'm guided by how urgently do I need to get there before war breaks out. Always. So Iran, the same thing. I go there just before it gets really, really bad. I went to the Sudan before it got really, really bad. I'm going to Xinjiang in October because it's kind of not so good anymore in Tibet. And I'm rushing to get to South Caucasus because I think Putin has some ideas so that could shut down as well. So what do I do in all these sort of trips, right? I do a lot of documentary research and take a lot of photographs, interview people, find out on the ground, boots on the ground, what sort of trace of Christianity and history of religions happened in that region. Because today, even in universities and seminaries, the idea of boots on the ground field research is not very popular anymore. It's hard, it's expensive, and it's not very popular, especially among professors who say, why should I do this? It's crazy. This is a young man's game. I mean, you could actually get hurt doing this sort of stuff because they're not nice roads. You got to go to places where nobody wants to see you if you're a Christian missionary like me. But there we go. And one of the reasons we do this in our ministry is we want to have a belief in integrity, which means we believe in something not because it's traditional, but because we've done a due diligence and we realize that yes, this is important, because our friends will ask us, how do you know? Now, we can't know everything, I grant you that. But what we can know, we'll do the best we can. Okay, it's about 2:08 now. We'll come back in about 10 minutes or so, okay?